they crowned a 10-year-old boy, and within a decade, he reshaped England with the fury of a tyrant. This isn't a fairy tale. This is how a child king became the spark that ignited a nation's collapse. They say England crowned a king at 10 years old, but what they never say is this: a child with a crown is more dangerous than a man with a sword. Because a sword can only cut what's in front of you. A crown cuts what's beneath you. And this is the story of the boy who broke England. The year is 1377. Westminster Abbey stands like a stone giant breathing incense, candlelight, and whispered fear. England's greatest king, Edward III, lies dead, and the realm he leaves behind is wounded and unstable. Famine has emptied granaries. Plague has stolen families whole. Taxes for the war with France have crushed villagers into dust. Nobles mutter rebellion in taverns, bedrooms, council chambers. The kingdom trembles like a sick animal. And into this chaos, into this fragile moment where one wrong move could shatter everything, steps a boy, Richard, 10 years old, soft-faced, bright-eyed, dressed in royal robes that hang on his small frame like borrowed armor. He watches the crown being carried toward him, heavy, jeweled, shimmering with the weight of 1,000 years of kings. It's a symbol meant for warriors, strategists, men carved by battle. Instead, it is lowered onto the head of a child who doesn't yet understand the world he is about to inherit. The choir sings, nobles kneel, bishops anoint him with holy oil. And behind every bow, every forced smile, every polished oath, lies ambition, not loyalty, not devotion, ambition. A child king isn't a ruler, he's an opportunity, a throne with no spine, a space to fill, a puppet to control. Richard's coronation marks the beginning of a silent war, not against France, not against rebels, but within England itself. Three factions rise from the shadows: the nobles, who see Richard as a chance to reclaim the influence they lost under stronger kings; the church, who sees divine potential in a young mind they can mold; and the household favorites, young, charming men who flatter Richard, men he trusts instinctively, men who will one day feed his worst impulses. But for now, Richard believes the world is honest. He believes people mean what they say. He believes power is earned through kindness. He believes he is safe. And that innocence, that fatal, blinding innocence, becomes the seed of everything that follows. In the first years of his reign, England begins to splinter. The war with France bleeds the treasury dry. New taxes fall heavily on villages already starving. The government, run by Richard's council, not the king himself, seems to care more about pleasing themselves than preserving the kingdom. Whispers rise in the countryside. We work and starve while the lords dine. The king is a child. The realm is leaderless. Why do we bow to those who take and give nothing? By 1381, England becomes a boiling cauldron. Pressure rising, anger brewing, waiting for a spark. That spark appears in Kent and Essex. Villages exhausted by tax collectors, villagers pushed past their limits. A rebellion ignites, and not a small one. Thousands rise, tens of thousands march. They burn manors, they storm towns, they kill officials, they seize London's gates. A tidal wave of fury marches toward the heart of the kingdom, and at its center stands a terrified, inexperienced 14-year-old king. Richard watches smoke rise across the Thames. He hears reports of death, destruction, threats on his life. His council shouts in panic, Nobles flee through hidden passages, and for the first time Richard senses the truth. The crown may sit on his head, but he has no power at all. The kingdom is collapsing because the boy on the throne was never prepared to hold it. And yet, it will be this rebellion, this moment of terror that awakens something dark inside him, something decisive, something dangerous. Because the next time Richard rides out, he will not return the same. London is burning. Smoke coils above rooftops, torches flicker like angry stars, and the roar of tens of thousands shakes the very bones of the city. The peasants' revolt has not arrived slowly. It has erupted violently, as if England has finally exhaled centuries of suffering in one furious breath. And standing at the center of this storm is a 14-year-old boy who should be learning his letters, not negotiating with an army. Richard II watches from the Tower of London, its stone walls no longer feeling like a fortress, but a prison. Below him, the rebels pour into London. They flood through the streets, destroying tax records, dragging officials from hiding, burning the homes of royal ministers. The message is simple. We do not fear the lords. We do not fear the crown. Richard's council crumbles. Nobles abandon him. His protectors argue about fleeing. But Richard stays, partly from courage, partly because he has no idea what else to do. And then, in a moment that shocks even his closest advisors, Richard demands a horse. He intends to face them. A boy, a child, rides out to confront a rebellion powerful enough to swallow London whole. At Mile End, the sea of rebels parts like a tide splitting around a single stone. Tens of thousands fall silent. All eyes fix on a king barely tall enough to look down from his saddle. Richard raises his hand, and despite the tremor in his voice, something unusual happens. They listen. He speaks to them plainly, more sincerely than any noble ever has. My people, tell me what troubles you. Demands are shouted. Freedom from serfdom, lower taxes, justice for corrupt officials. Richard, overwhelmed but steady, agrees to reforms on the spot. Whether he intends to keep those promises is another question. But at that moment, he does the impossible. He calms a rebellion that should have destroyed him. He rides back to London hailed as a hero, his fear replaced by something new. Confidence. Dangerous confidence. Because in that moment, Richard learns a lesson that reshapes his life. If you speak boldly, people will follow. If you promise them salvation, they will kneel. If you stand alone and refuse to break, they will mistake it for strength. A king, he realizes, does not need armies to bend a kingdom. He needs belief. And now, Richard believes in himself more fiercely than ever. But victory is not the same as wisdom. The next day at Smithfield, Richard meets the rebels again, this time led by their iconic commander, Wat Tyler. The meeting turns violent, a misunderstanding, an argument, a spark. Knights slash forward and Tyler collapses, bleeding into the dirt. The rebels erupt in rage, ready to flood the city with blood. And then Richard does it again. The impossible. He gallops alone toward the furious mob and shouts, "I am your king. I will be your leader. Follow me." One voice, one boy, one spark of confidence, and thousands of armed men hesitate. The revolt dissolves. The rebels retreat. The danger ends. England praises his courage. His advisors bow in awe. Chroniclers whisper that God himself guides him. But courage, when fed praise without guidance, warps. Richard begins to think he is chosen, untouchable, ordained, and what begins as bravery slowly hardens into pride. Once back in safety, Richard reveals his true intention. The promises he made were tools, not truths. He revokes them one by one. Rebels are hunted, leaders executed, villages punished. He no longer sees himself as a boy who survived danger. He sees himself as a king who subdued a nation, and it changes him. The humiliation of the rebellion mutates into paranoia. The praise mutates into entitlement. The relief of victory mutates into the hunger for power. A dangerous seed takes root. If I faced 50,000 rebels alone and lived, who in England can truly oppose me? Richard II, the soft-spoken boy who once trembled in the tower, now walks the halls of power with a new posture, straight, sharp, unyielding. He begins punishing critics, ignoring counsel, elevating flattering favorites while dismissing seasoned advisors. And England begins to sense that something has changed in their young king. The child who faced danger with courage is slowly becoming a ruler who will create danger for others. The rebellion didn't just shape him, it awakened something inside him. Something that, in the years ahead, will grow into tyranny. Something that will tear England apart. The years after the rebellion change Richard II in ways no one sees coming. The boy who once pleaded for guidance now refuses to hear a single opposing voice. The king who won crowds with sincerity now believes his words alone can shape reality. By 19, Richard surrounds himself with men who tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Flatterers, favorites, young courtiers who praise him as if he were chosen by heaven itself. His trusted companion among them is Robert de Vere, a man Richard elevates with dizzying speed, ignoring the shock and fury of England's most powerful nobles. To Richard, loyalty is everything, but to the nobles, his favoritism is a threat that distorts the balance of power. Whispers begin, not in taverns this time, but in the halls of Parliament, behind manor doors, in the shadows of great cathedrals. The Lords Appellant are born, a faction of powerful aristocrats who believe Richard must be restrained before he destroys the kingdom. Richard sees them not as critics, but as traitors. And once a king starts calling his protectors traitors, the kingdom itself begins to rot. By 1386, England faces danger on all sides. France prepares an invasion. The treasury is empty. Corruption spreads through the administration like mold through wet timber. Parliament demands change. Richard refuses. He insists he is accountable to no one. Not council, not noble, not Parliament. The tension finally snaps. The Lords Appellant raise armies. Richard's authority collapses in an instant. He is forced into a corner, stripped of influence, a king in name only. Humiliated, Richard is watched, supervised, treated like a misbehaving child by the very men who once feared to stand in his presence. And humiliation is the fire that forges his darkest impulses. He studies his enemies, he waits. He bides his time with a smile so polished no one sees the blade behind it. Richard learns patience the way a predator learns stillness. When the nobles loosen their grip, believing the king has matured, Richard finally moves. He strikes fast, ruthless, unforgiving. His own uncle, Thomas of Woodstock, is seized in the night, dragged to Calais, and quietly murdered. The Earl of Arundel, executed publicly. The Earl of Warwick, condemned and exiled. Bolingbroke, the most dangerous of them all, first banished, then stripped of his inheritance, his land seized outright in a move so vindictive that even Richard's allies go pale. Richard has waited years for this moment, and now, finally, he believes he has broken his enemies. In his mind, this is justice, retribution, balance. But in the eyes of England, this is something else entirely. Tyranny. With the nobility terrified and the court reshaped in his image, Richard begins ruling through fear. He suspends parliament, raises taxes with no consent, confiscates property, arrests critics, silences anyone who doubts him. He believes the kingdom is bending to his will. He believes the throne is finally secure. He believes he has rewritten the fate denied to him as a child. But Richard cannot see that the fear he's cultivated is hollow, fragile, temporary. Because fear isn't loyalty. It's pressure. And pressure, no matter how tightly a king applies it, eventually breaks. And when it does, the man returning to England will not come to negotiate, but to take back everything Richard stole. Richard II believes he has finally secured his throne. His enemies are dead, exiled, or too frightened to speak. His court bows on command. His laws are unquestioned. His power feels absolute. But a king who rules through fear never realizes when fear turns into resentment, or when resentment turns into opportunity. Richard makes a fatal mistake in 1399. He leaves England. He sails to Ireland to crush a rebellion, bringing his loyal knights, his personal guard, and most of his remaining military strength. For the first time in years, England is left without its king. And in that vacuum, a single name returns like a storm front. Henry Bolingbroke, the exile, the dispossessed heir, the man Richard stole land, wealth, and legacy from. Bolingbroke lands in Yorkshire not as a lone noble seeking mercy, but as a leader welcomed home. Powerful lords join him instantly. Old allies rise from hiding. Even common citizens flock to his banner, tired of Richard's heavy-handed rule. In a matter of days, Bolingbroke's army swells. Castle gates open without resistance. Towns surrender before a single arrow is fired. He moves across the land with the momentum of inevitability. England isn't just accepting a new leader. It's rejecting the old one. When Richard returns from Ireland, he steps onto Welsh shores expecting loyalty and support. What he finds is silence. His armies have deserted. His nobles have defected. His supply lines have collapsed. Richard is no longer feared. He is abandoned. He flees to Conway Castle, a lonely stone fortress overlooking crashing waves. Here he waits for reinforcements that will never come. Bolingbroke surrounds the region. Richard's isolation becomes undeniable. The boy who once calmed a rebellion with words now has no words left to save himself. Envoys arrive with a simple message: surrender. Richard, who once believed himself untouchable, is escorted back to London like a prisoner. Crowds gather to see him. But the cheers of his youth have become cold stares. The admiration has soured into anger. Richard II enters the capital not as a king, but as a warning. Parliament convenes to decide his fate. They accuse him of tyranny, corruption, revenge killings, misrule, and treating England as his personal stage. For the first time, Richard is forced to confront the consequences of his own decisions. He stands before the assembly, hands trembling, voice hollow. He tries to defend himself, but the chamber is unmoved. the question comes, do you resign the crown? The boy king who once imagined himself chosen by God now stares at the symbol he spent his life protecting and realizes he can no longer carry it. Quietly he whispers, I do. The crown is handed to Bolingbroke, now King Henry IV. A new dynasty begins. Richard's ends. Richard is taken to Pontefract Castle, a cold, isolated prison far from London's politics. Winter grips the stone walls, snow thickens the silence, and there, England's former king fades from history. Some say he starved, refusing food out of despair. Others say he was murdered on Henry's orders. No record is certain. Only one thing is Richard II, the boy who once faced an army alone, dies utterly alone. His reign becomes a lesson carved into time. Power given too young becomes power used too wrong. Fear is a throne that always collapses, and sometimes the greatest danger to a kingdom is not the enemy outside, but the child crowned within.